number one in your list of things that we can do to support our body's natural glutathione process and production is avoidance. Let's go from there. Let's give a number 2 and 3. Are there other lifestyle factors, food? Are there other lifestyle factors, working out, etc., that also support our body's natural production of glutathione?
Absolutely. So the second one would be through diet. We can provide the building blocks that are necessary for glutathione production as well as glutathione recycling through the diet. So eating foods that are rich in sulfur, because sulfur is the part actually within the glutathione molecule that's doing the hard work. It's the sulfur. So things like broccoli, cruciferous vegetables, garlic, onions, sulfur-rich foods, those can go a really long way to provide the building blocks. We also need protein because glutathione is actually a tripeptide, so it's 3 amino acids. So we need the amino acids glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. And you can get that through food. You can also get that through supplementation. I personally take whey protein because there have been human trials showing that whey protein consumption can increase glutathione levels, which I find to be really interesting. Nonetheless, we can also exercise. Exercise is a huge driver of glutathione. So initially when you exercise, there's actually a small period of oxidative stress that happens, but this is an adaptive response. This is to stimulate glutathione. So there's a little bit of oxidation that happens, but it's a good thing. And I don't think we necessarily need to turn that off by pumping in a bunch of glutathione. I think what we need to do is just allow the body to do what it needs to do, which is make more glutathione. And that can be after weight training as well as aerobic exercise.
Incredible. You were mentioning about sulfur and how important that is. That'd be all the classification of cruciferous vegetables, right? So just name a few that are out there that, broccoli you mentioned. We had on Dr. Jed Fahey on the podcast, who's a researcher, I believe that he is with Johns Hopkins, and he was the one that did the research into sulforaphane and how broccoli sprouts have one of the highest concentrations of sulforaphane, which is an incredible detoxifier inside of the body.
Yes, absolutely. So broccoli sprouts, you can actually increase the amount of sulforaphane in your broccoli if you add some mustard seed on top when you cook it. That will increase the amount of sulforaphane. But also what I learned is that broccoli that's been previously frozen will not have the same level of sulforaphane because of the enzyme that's required to create it. Actually gets denatured when you freeze the broccoli. So fresh broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, the really sulfury vegetables, leafy greens that you hear about, there's a lot to it. And I think the fundamental is that it's actually being mediated through glutathione, a lot of these benefits.
Yeah, not to mention the extra fiber that you'd be getting inside of your diet. I will say that there are some people that I know that really have a hard time with cruciferous. Maybe they grew up picky eaters. They're not getting enough of these broccoli, and they might vomit at the sight of broccoli sprouts, even though I love broccoli sprouts. You pour in a little bit of olive oil, sea salt, I'll just eat them by themselves. Like, they taste amazing. In those instances, I think that there's some pretty good supplement options that are out there that have sulforaphane inside of them. I'm not affiliated with any brands, but people can look them up and just get from a high quality source. Maybe even at the Swell, you guys have the Swell score. Maybe even have some sulforaphane recommended supplements. So just to recap, avoid toxins, number 1, to the best degree we can. Getting our recommended levels of exercising. And we're big fans on this podcast of resistance training, right? And sprints is another thing that we're a big fan of. So that is supportive. Of course, supporting our sleep, which has many other benefits, but there's a natural detoxification process that's going to happen. And I'm sure that's all tied in with glutathione as well too, and supporting those mechanisms. And then having a diet that includes things like sulforaphane and sulfur and a lot of the cruciferous vegetables. Those are the main things that you would say for glutathione. Is that accurate?
Yes. It's very simple, actually.
Very simple. Very simple. And everything is connected to everything. We're not just doing this to have better glutathione. We're doing this to improve our overall health, which is the good news in all of this. It's not that there's one diet that's perfect for avoiding toxins, and then there's a whole separate diet that's good for your brain, and there's a whole separate diet for your heart. All these things overlap together. So even though it feels overwhelming that we're exposed to so many different toxins in the environment, The good thing is the solutions are very straightforward. Yeah, they can be tough, but they're straightforward in doing it. Okay, now let's go to glutathione supplementation, right? Is it worthwhile, and should we be considering to include glutathione as a supplement form, especially if we have these other things, taken care of in our life?
I wouldn't say that across the board supplementation is for everyone. Definitely consult with your healthcare provider before you start any type of glutathione or supplementation in that regard. But something that people have found to be useful, a lot of studies on this, is N-acetylcysteine, which provides the rate-limiting amino acid cysteine for glutathione production. The issue is that you can't supplement with glutathione as is because it requires a transporter to get into the cell. So it's not efficient that way. Liposomal glutathione can be useful since it's already in liposomal form. It'll just diffuse into the cell membrane, right? That's the idea. But some people have found benefit taking N-acetylcysteine. The issue is that if you have a genetic predisposition to have lower glutathione production, certain enzymes, genetic polymorphisms in those enzymes, then you may not be able to synthesize enough glutathione even with NAC. So that's something. That's one of the reasons why it is so important to practice the avoidance first, because if you do have the genetic predisposition to decrease glutathione, then practicing the avoidance will just help you to maintain what you do have, because you may not be able to make it as quickly or as efficiently as someone else.
One other thing that we didn't mention inside of it is that, are there any other supplements that would be useful in addition to glutathione? I've heard you talk about high quality fish oil as being something that could be supportive when it comes to minimizing our toxic exposure and supporting our body. Is that accurate?
Actually, it would be something like a vitamin D and magnesium. Those have been much more well characterized in fish oil. Fish oil has been studied to a certain degree, but there's more evidence and more information about vitamin D and magnesium.
Now, let's back up for a second. And I said we're going to come back to this list. You gave us this order of operations of things to focus on. First, the things that we are absolutely, definitely, most positively that we need to survive. And that first one that you mentioned was air and air quality. I've heard you share this on podcasts before. We've written about it on our Try This newsletter, is that most people, especially in this day and age of forest fires and everything that's going on, especially here in North America, but in other parts of the world too. This summer, Sicily was on fire. It's crazy. Most people are surprised to hear that the EPA has said multiple times, but I believe the original source was from a position paper that they put out in like the 80s. We put it up on a previous podcast. We'll link to it in the show notes, saying that indoor air quality can be up to 3 to 5 times worse. Your indoor air is worse than the outdoor air, even in cities like Los Angeles, where I live. How is that possible that our indoor air quality could be so bad inside, even in some of the biggest cities in the world?
It really has to do with our lifestyle. So a lot of people don't open their windows, which is the easiest and cheapest way to get fresh air into your room. And in fact, if you open the windows for an hour, depending on the size of the room, an average room, you can exchange the air in that entire room. So freshen the air within an hour, just opening the windows. But of course, if your outdoor air quality is worse than your indoor air quality, then that won't help, right? So it's really about the human activities that we're doing day to day. Cooking. We don't really want to avoid cooking because we need to eat, right? And it's better to cook food than it is to not cook food, right? Than to eat the processed stuff. So we want to cook our food. But having adequate ventilation is absolutely paramount, fundamental, critical. If you are cooking, turn on the vent fan. Make sure it's venting outside. Open your windows. If you don't have a vent fan, take a fan and blow those fumes out an open window. That will do you a heck of a lot of good. And also, don't burn your food. Because it's basically about the particulates that are coming out from smoke. So we want to avoid generating smoke. Another one is we don't want to burn things unnecessarily. For example, burning candles, there are definite use cases for that, but a lot of people burn their candles and they don't open their windows. So they're just trapping in a lot of these toxins that we're creating that don't need to be there. And then excess moisture can lead to mold formation. So if you're not getting adequate ventilation, sunlight, and things like that into your rooms, your home, you could get mold as well.
So there's a lot of things inside the home that can very easily go awry. And now all of a sudden these things, and even some things we think of as being good. When I was young, I was really a big fan of like incense, right? And these are natural incense that have not had fragrance added to them, right? There's a whole category of incense that are fragrance added. And I would love that smell. It would remind me of like visiting temples in India and like, like a spiritual journey. And like, it was great. And then one time I got my first sort of air monitor, and I saw that, the air quality, as soon as I lit these incense, the level of particulates that are in the air by parts per million. This was like a live air monitor that had a reading on it. The air quality was scored from a 0 is the worst to 100. And generally, because I would keep an air filter in the house, I'd be around like 90, 95, somewhere around there. And I lit an incense and I let it burn for about an hour. And I came back in the room and the air quality was like 71. And that was just after an hour. So there was an immediate tank in air quality based on the particulates in the air. So there's so many different ways that our indoor air can expose us, but it's very easy to avoid those things. As you mentioned, anytime you see smoke, whether it's from cooking or a candle or anything, you got to imagine that there's particulates inside of the air. So just opening the windows is a huge component. Air filters. Is that something that you guys look at the Swell? Have you looked at different air filters and which ones are good to use?
Yes, absolutely. So it has to do a lot with HEPA, of course. That's going to be the air filter that's going to trap the particulate matter that we're speaking of. Those tend to be some of the most toxic air pollutants, but also having a carbon filter to capture some of the volatile organic compounds that are generated from fragrances and things like that you can't see necessarily with your eyes. Those being trapped on a carbon filter can also help tremendously. But something else I wanted to mention on top of just opening your windows is taking off your shoes before you come in the house. Because you're tracking in so much actual physical, gunk from outside. That's actually contributing to air pollution as well, because you're just walking around and constantly kicking it up. If you're bringing more in every day and you're not cleaning every day, then that starts to accumulate.
Great reminder. I mean, I grew up in a household that you had to take your shoes off, right? Asian households. Yeah. Your background is Vietnamese?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you wore your shoes in the house, you would not be allowed back in.
Yeah, totally. So that's an easy one. So there's plenty of easy things, many things that a lot of us are doing, but maybe we're not doing them at the frequency, or maybe we are doing them because a lot of this audience is quite aware, and we need to give ourselves a pat on the back and say, great, you're doing a good job in this toxic world that we live in terms of exposure. You're not going to get around not getting exposed. There's going to be something. You're going to walk into a room. You're going to go into a gym. You're going to go to your office and they have air fresheners everywhere. There's going to be something or another. And slow and steady, you can reduce your total burden. That's there. You don't need to freak out. We're not here fear mongering. You're just trying to spread awareness that there's simple things that we can all do. So let's move from the next category. So we started with air, and then let's go to water. What kind of water filter do you use at home?
We have a reverse osmosis unit at home that hooks into our water line. And so that's what we have for drinking. We also have a whole house filter. So it's pre-filtered water that even goes into the reverse osmosis. But something that I've been exploring also are countertop distillers. So the process of distillation will purify the water to the highest degree, but it removes everything. So we would like to add minerals back in, and you can do that yourself. And you can also pick the highest quality minerals to add back in as well. So you can really control your water quality with, devices that you can get at home.
Beautiful. Are there any brands of anything that you recommend to people, or should they just go to the Swell Score and check it out?
The Swell Score, we do have a countertop distiller. I myself personally am using an AquaTrue reverse osmosis under sink unit.
Great. I have one of those in my place as well. I've done business with AquaTrue over the while. I've been pretty clear with that. I recommend them. They've been a sponsor in the past, so obviously, that disclosure for everyone. They did not tell us to mention that. That's just something that we use. I want to mention one other thing, and this is taking us out of order, but it popped into my mind because you really have, as aware as I am of everything here, you changed my behavior in the last week on something. Okay. And here's what that category is. What is the challenge with the paper cups that we go out in the morning, and I'm not getting coffee from Starbucks. Nothing wrong with that. There's a great Starbucks across the street. I go to another little bougie boutique coffee shop down the street. I like to make coffee at home, and that's my preferred method. But every so often, I like to walk with my wife, and we'll go and get coffee together. When we go and get coffee, we get a paper cup. Amazing. It's a hot coffee. We don't have plastic. We have a paper cup. We smile. We drink that coffee. Usually takes us a little while. We're nursing it for a little while. What is one of the reasons why I might want to, and that I have been reconsidering getting coffee in that paper cup?
Unfortunately, the paper cup is lined with a thin layer of polyethylene plastic. So a lot of people would believe that the paper cups that you're getting are lined with wax, but that simply isn't true. The wax coatings are for what I've seen when you buy water cups, usually with cold beverages. I would surmise that the reason is that the hot liquid could melt the wax. Maybe that's why, I'm not sure. But it seems that more cups out there now are no longer lined with wax, but with plastic. And that plastic has been shown in studies to leach microplastic particles into your hot beverages. And so most people how long do you think it would take to drink a beverage? Like maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on how hot it is.
It takes me an hour.
Yeah, it can.
Sometimes I'll keep that coffee around for an hour.
Right, it can, right? It really just depends. And within 15 minutes, that study found that 25,000 microplastic particles are leaching into your drink. Not to mention, there's also heavy metals, lead, and so on that are leaching from those plastic linings, unfortunately. And that's not even mentioning the lid that goes on top. So as the hot liquid is passing through the lid, I would hypothesize that there's microplastic shedding there as well.
Yeah, I don't drink through a lid. That I'm good with. I convinced my wife when we originally, before she was my wife, and we were dating, we went out for coffee. I said, whoa, let me take that lid off for you. We're going to walk a little slower because we're on a walking date, but it's going to be better for your body if you're not exposing that hot liquid. So what should we do instead? It's not that we shouldn't go out and get coffee, right? And obviously there's, if we can get organic coffee and other stuff, because coffee has a bunch of different exposures to different things, but you're not telling us not to go out and get coffee. There's a simple solution. What's that solution?
The simple solution is to BYOM, bring your own mug or cup. I love getting coffee out. I don't avoid getting coffee because it's not organic. I understand it is what it is. I want to get that coffee out. I'll bring my own cup with me. Not only does it cut down on plastic waste or, single-use cups, but it also clearly will reduce my toxic load because I'm not swallowing tens of thousands of microplastic particles with that drink.
Do you approve of my Yeti mug over here?
Looks great. I noticed it and I was going to compliment you on that. So well done.
Amazing. I made some tea at home, some green tea, and I got this from some friends of mine at Human Co. So shout out to them for the mug. Okay, great. So that was a little sidebar, but it was an important sidebar because it's still one of those things that a lot of people get coffee every day. Some people are drinking 3 or 4 cups. We have no idea how many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of microplastics somebody's accumulating over the course of a year or a lifetime. Now, I thought I knew a lot about the subject, and I would tell people about, hey, watch out for microplastics in tea and tea bags, and make sure you're using teas that don't have that. I'll get your opinion on that in a second. But I didn't really know about nanoplastics. What are nanoplastics?
Nanoplastics are smaller than microplastics. So microplastics can break down and become nanoplastics. And the issue with nanoparticles are that they can easily penetrate cell membranes, and the effects are pretty wide reaching. They can penetrate skin, so on and so forth. So if you're, applying nano products to the skin, it could be penetrating the skin as well.
Do we know of anything that helps us remove or encourage our body from removing microplastics? Does that go back to glutathione, or does glutathione not make a difference when it comes to these microplastics?
It hasn't actually been studied exactly how we can detoxify, but in general, what's happening with microplastics is oxidative stress and inflammation, both of which glutathione can help. So while we don't know the exact mechanism of detoxification, of practicing toxic avoidance, managing your glutathione levels, and that's going to help regardless.
Is there any way to independently, same way we would get blood work to look at our LDL or ApoB or our fasting insulin, is there any way to get a good sense of how you're doing as a glutathione producer? Like, are you doing well? Are you doing poorly? Is there any way to independently, as a biomarker or a measurement test, look at levels of glutathione inside of our body to get some sense of, hey, are we doing well or are we not doing well? Do we have any technology like that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there are clinical tests out there that have been done. I personally haven't taken one myself, but I know that there's also tests that you can do to measure your toxin load as well. So I think that would be really interesting, is to measure your glutathione and measure your toxin load as well. That could be really interesting.
Do you know if any of these tests to measure toxins are available to people that are listening to this podcast as consumers? I know that there's tests that, clinicians will use to look at like heavy metals inside of the body. There's companies like Doctors Data that provides doctors laboratory tests to look at like heavy metals. There's a company called Genova that a lot of practitioners use. But are there toxin screenings that are out there that are available to the everyday consumer that's listening today?
Yes, I've actually seen one from a group called Million Marker.
Million Marker.
Yes.
Can we bring that up online?
I haven't used this one myself.
Okay.
But it measures endocrine disruptors and a lot of the toxins that we've spoken about today.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Looks like they have a little bit of a focus on pregnancy and fertility. So it's an at-home test. Looks like you probably do a urine sample.
It looks like urine.
And you send it in, and they're going to look at toxins that are there. Cool. What the is going on with toilet paper?
So toilet paper is something that every single person uses. For the most part, I know some people don't use toilet paper, and there's options for that too, right? You can use a bidet, you can air dry, however you prefer to do it.
Air dry?
Yeah. I've
wow,
heard
that's a little shocking. We got some people laughing in the audience over here. I never heard of air dry.
I guess if you're in a tight situation and you don't have toilet paper, that's your only option, right?
If you air dry, do not contact me. I don't want anything to have to do with you. I wish you the best, but don't contact me. Okay, a bidet. Yes, there's plenty of bidets that are out there. They're environmentally friendly. We can link to a couple of them. But for those people that do use toilet paper, which is the vast majority of people, what is the problem with toilet paper?
A lot of toilet paper, so paper products in general, they tend to be bleached, right? All the toilet paper you see in stores is bright white, and they're bleached with chlorine. And this creates dioxins, which are carcinogens. And when you think about rubbing carcinogens in your private areas, this is increasing the amount that gets absorbed. And over time, this can also lead to irritation. And we just don't really understand fully what's happening when you're using these types of toilet papers all the time down there. Because the female genitalia especially is highly vascularized in that area. So any type of friction or rubbing is driving the chemicals into the bloodstream. Yeah,
so you're not telling, again, people that they shouldn't use toilet paper. There's actually better alternatives that are out there. Can you just mention what should be people looking for? And also, you have an entire website that you've created, and you've also helped create another website where you list a lot of these products. And it's actually a fantastic resource. I actually texted my wife a few months ago when I first heard about, toilet paper not being the best for you. I said, wow, we should switch over to this brand over here that Dr. Burkhart mentions, because she's seen the testing that they do. So what do you recommend? Actually, mention the website that people can go to, and then what should people be thinking about switching their toilet paper to?
So the website is theswellscore.com, and we basically created an online marketplace that's a one-stop shop for the best in wellness products. So I'm in charge of vetting the beauty and personal care category, looking into vendor documentation. So we're asking for their certificate of analysis, looking at contaminants, checking for the purity, and making sure that the product is actually adhering to what they're marketing. So we're trying to get rid of greenwashing, which is a big issue, right? We don't want to just start promoting products that don't actually check out. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make sure that these products are legit before they make it onto the site. And so it's something that I take immense pride in, being able to contribute to a resource like this, because it's something that I wish I would have had when I first started changing up my products and my lifestyle. And it's very powerful because there's a membership option. So it's basically like Costco, but of the best of wellness products.
That's awesome. We'll link to it below. I love supporting any entrepreneurial efforts that make this whole process of living a low-tox lifestyle a lot easier. So on that note, what types of toilet paper would be a better option for people who are trying to pay attention to that?
Right. The best option that I have found is unbleached bamboo toilet paper. And the reason is that a lot of toilet paper has actually been found to contain PFAS chemicals because of the water that is used to produce the chemicals, the paper materials that are going into creating the toilet paper. There's studies showing now that there's PFAS chemicals in toilet paper. And the worst kind of toilet paper you can use is recycled toilet paper because people recycle also their receipts. And receipts are coated in bisphenol A, which is an endocrine disruptor. Then those receipts get turned into toilet paper. So then the toilet paper contains dioxins, PFAS, and BPA, which are terrible. We don't want to be rubbing that in our private areas. So the best type of toilet paper is unbleached bamboo. But one particular brand I found actually did the studies and showed a clean bill of health, at least for PFAS chemicals, 1,4-dioxane, and a few other contaminants as well.
Do you want to mention the brand? I don't mind giving them a plug.
Yeah, sure. It's Plant Paper.
Okay, amazing. We'll link to it in the show notes. And I just want to mention, because part of this is also making this doable for people, right? And sometimes the bamboo toilet paper companies that are out there that I've seen, it is because they don't have scale in the same way that, like, you know, whatever the major brands of toilet paper are, it's expensive. And some households, like you have a lot of kids, some households, I'm always hearing, you know, mom friends of mine saying, like, it's crazy how much toilet paper we go through and how often I have to go and get it. So I do want to mention that the bamboo toilet papers that are out there, they are typically more expensive that are there. And you're making a step in the right direction. But if your family's open to it, there are plenty of sort of modern bidets that are out there. I know there's companies like Tushy and other people that are there that have made fantastic bidets that are going to be a lot cheaper over the long haul if your family feels, you know, comfortable of switching to a bidet that's there. So I just wanted to mention that note about the economics of, you know, some of the cleaner toilet paper that's out there. Okay, you mentioned something which is super important for women, which is the female genitalia in particular, because you're using these products like toilet paper and feminine hygiene products, period products. They're being used on a regular basis. This is another source of hidden toxins that people are getting exposed to. So what's the problem with the period products and the feminine hygiene products that are out there?
A lot of them, nobody knew what ingredients were actually going into them. And it was only within the last couple of years that manufacturers started listing the materials on the packages. And in other parts of the world, that still is not common practice. But at least,
why did they start? Were they getting pressure?
Right. There was some legislation that happened in the state of New York. And so companies started just printing it right on the container, what is in these period products. And in tampons, they've done studies as well as in diapers, and they found things like, again, dioxins from bleaching. There's even benzene and formaldehyde, unfortunately, because of fragrance and scented period products, which are the absolute worst. So if you're looking to even improve a tiny bit, already just avoiding the scented products is already a step in the right direction, a big step in the right direction.
Avoid scented everything.
Yes. Scented products that contain undisclosed synthetic fragrance mixtures, that's what we're talking about. Essential oils, that's a whole different scenario. But most period products don't contain essential oils, right? They contain these undisclosed fragrances. So you have no idea what you're putting down there. So there's plasticizer chemicals. I mean, a lot. I'm speaking specifically on the disposables, which is what most people grow up using. It's just what's available in stores. It's what your friends are using. A lot of people learn how to manage their cycle from their mom, their sister, or their friends. And so if that's what people are using, then you just kind of go with it.
Yeah, we're talking about tampons, pads, all those things. If you're not using the cleaner options that are out there, you're getting exposed to potentially heavy metals, carcinogens like dioxins that you mentioned, volatile organic compounds like benzene, pesticides, and potentially glyphosate in some instances, bleach, and again, endocrine disruptors. We keep on hearing this term. And, you know, you mentioned something before, which is super important to pay attention to. You know, cancer rates are going up, even amongst, you know, young people. Now, we've made advancements in sort of cancer management. We've had some experts in this space come on this podcast and talk about the most important things that are there when it comes to of how to address and sort of protect ourselves against cancers. And there's a whole group of things that we actually just don't know. We just don't know. Individual ingredients have been studied to their link in increasing cancers. These are a lot of the carcinogenic items that you've been mentioned, in specifically like rodents and lab rats and other stuff. We just don't have that big human data that's there, but we know these ingredients are not helpful. So again, this is why we have to live that low tox lifestyle. So what are the options that are there or brands that you would recommend that are available for women when it comes to these feminine hygiene products?
An alternative to tampons, something that I have found to be particularly useful, are silicone menstrual cups. Not all silicone is created equal, unfortunately, so there are some nuances there too. Just look for medical grade silicone on the package. But that wouldn't be my top choice. My top choice would actually be reusable period products. So reusable period underwear or menstrual pads. Optimal choice would be organic cotton. As natural and organic as possible, meaning staying away from polyester, nylon. We don't want those types of textiles down there because they contain BPA and other endocrine disruptors. So you're just replacing one source of endocrine disruptor with another. So if you can get away from that, optimal choice for me, and in my opinion, is organic cotton period panties and organic cotton reusable pads.
If I tell my wife to use reusable pads, she's going to laugh in my face. First of all, I don't tell her to do anything. But if I make a suggestion, so is there something that's in between that optimal and there's something that, and if we have optimal on the right-hand side and we have sort of the worst sort of products that are there, which are sold in these big box stores, you see that Target, Costco, a lot of them are using organic cotton as part of these disposable products. Is that a big step in the right direction?
It is a step in the right direction, but again, you still have the adhesives, you've got the plastic backing, so you're not avoiding the bulk of it with these disposables. Not to mention the environmental impact that it has, because once you throw them away, then they start polluting the environment as well. And then that, of course, makes the water quality worse, air quality, soil. So in order to sort of go in the right direction, yes, organic cotton disposables are better than the conventional, especially fragranced.
Okay, amazing. Yes, fragrance free for all this stuff. You know, this all goes into this larger topic, again, that is today's episode is dedicated to, which is minimizing our exposure. That's step one. When you minimize exposure because you get educated, you realize and you start to become the CEO of your own health. You're not letting all these companies whose primary focus is profit, and I have no problem with that, but through that process of only focusing on profit, there's not always the incentive to look into how things are made. I was one time in a previous company doing business with a natural flavoring manufacturer, right? Like somebody who orders different natural flavoring that was there to make a product. And I always thought like, okay, wow, like organic natural flavors, like, you know, that's going to be good because it says organic. And I asked the company, I said, hey, what is actually in this product? And they said, we actually don't know. And these flavor houses that make them, they consider it a trade secret. So they will never tell us or anybody else. So we have to trust them that it is, you know, something that's good. We know that it comes from, you know, natural products, but that can mean so many different things. It doesn't mean how it's processed. It doesn't mean, you know, there's a bunch of standards that could be lost inside of it. So many of the companies themselves actually do not know what are in many of these products, which is why we have to fight to protect ourselves and our families. Do you agree with that?
100%. I worked in the flavor and fragrance chemical industry for a number of years. I was one of the few people that had access to the flavor formulations just as part of my job. I was in charge of making sure that flavors were safe before they went to market. Whatever happened before I got there, I cannot speak on. A lot of flavors were grandfathered in by the FDA, meaning that whatever happened before the FDA started setting these sort of guidelines, or at least kind of providing some oversight into this, whatever was already in use is considered grass, generally recognized as safe, but nobody really knows if it's actually safe because there's no data behind it. It was just It was already being used, so just continue using it.
Hey, we've been using this for a while. Who knows if it's toxic or not toxic? That's fine. Just let's keep using it.
Exactly. So grass is a dubious term at best. With flavor chemicals, like you said, nobody knows what's in the flavors. Unless you're doing big business with the flavor house in the millions of dollars per year, they're not going to tell you. They would tell you what's on the hazard label. So for example, what do you need to know to tell your workers on what type of protective equipment they need to wear? Is it a carcinogen? Is it a mutagen? Is it reproductive toxin? That's the only information they'll tell you. They won't tell you the exact chemical names that are in there. And like you said, natural flavors don't even need to come from food. As long as it was identified in nature, it could be considered natural if it was created with a natural process. That's so ambiguous and so gray. And it was one of the biggest reasons why I could no longer participate in that industry.
Well, I appreciate that you had the courage to leave. We talked about your story in detail in our last episode, if anybody wants to watch that. And that you had the courage to leave, which you also were forced to because your health was declining, right? But then you set your mission to want to fight for everybody who's here. You know, you're a mom yourself. You're fighting for moms. You're fighting for family members. You're fighting for people who don't have the ability. You know, the vast majority of people, first of all, they're not even listening to podcasts, right? If you're listening to this episode, chances are you're somebody who's, you know, has some degree of education and maybe has some resources in your life where you actually can enjoy things in your leisure time, like getting educated and figuring out how to protect yourself. A lot of people that are out there, they're working, you know, 2 jobs, 3 jobs just to put food on the table, and they don't have the ability to go super deep on this. So the more that we make this easy for the people that do have resources, I truly believe in the capitalistic spirit that a lot of people who are listening today, some of those people might go and create a new company, and that company ends up scaling and it becomes a much better version compared to a lot of the toxic options that are out there. So I appreciate your mission and your dedication to this cause. And, you know, again, you put out some fantastic content on Instagram and on YouTube. I want everybody to follow you. Just can you mention your handle if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, it's at Dr. Yvonne Burkart.
Amazing. We'll have that in the show notes as well. All right, let's continue the tour around the home and talk about everyday household products that are contributing to our toxic burden and potentially increasing our risk of all sorts of diseases that we want to avoid, especially cancer. So the one that I want to talk about next is cookware. What are the worst types of cookware that people should be aware of?
The worst type of cookware out there is something that most people have in their homes. If you walk into any store, it's the most prevalent type. It's the most easy to use. It's the most convenient. It's the most affordable. Everybody loves it. I myself used it as well, and that's nonstick cookware. Nonstick cookware is extremely, of course, it's convenient, right? It's nonstick. That's the whole point, is that it has no mess. It's easy to clean. What's not to love? Unfortunately, the coatings are made out of chemicals of unknown hazard. And one of them being, actually, this is known, PFAS. PFAS chemicals are what's used to make Teflon. Teflon is a type of PFAS. Some of them have been phased out, but replaced with other types that are similar. So under the guise that, oh, well, we got rid of some of these toxic PFAS, but guess what? They've replaced it with something that's similar.
I've heard that there's hundreds of thousands of PFAS type chemicals that are out there. I read in one report. And why it came up is because the federal government issued a study last year, which was in the right direction. We'll put it on the screen above. We've talked about it in the podcast, where they commissioned a study for local water departments to actually analyze how much PFAS was in their water supply. And this study was all over the news. And it was like over 60% of municipalities found PFAS in their water supply. But when you dig into the report a little bit further, you see, like, even though that's alarming, that's like the majority of our water systems that are out there, they were only looking for 4 of the major PFAS. And when I double clicked into it a little bit more and looked into it, apparently there's over 100,000 type of PFAS type chemicals that are out there. That is mind blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the tip of the iceberg, right? I think what they were trying to do is to choose the ones that represent the major groups within PFAS chemicals and the ones that historically were the most commonly used by industry. But again, like you said, that doesn't even cover a fraction of what is potentially out there. So I think it's a step in the right direction, of course, but there's so much more that needs to be done, clearly, because it's not covering enough.
So Teflon, also the other thing is that even if you use any kind of nonstick cookware that's out there, one important point that you've made in your content is that, again, part of living a low-tox lifestyle is not constantly buying new things. So maybe you might have a pan or a situation or whatever that is a healthier option that's out there. But especially if you have a nonstick pan where it's scratched or you can see the aluminum, that's something that people should throw away today and replace. Why is that?
Yes, that's a great point, because as soon as you compromise that coating, as soon as you scratch it, it's releasing PFAS particles into your food. The last thing you want to eat is PFAS, because once it's in your body, it does not leave for years. And just so you know, chemicals tend to leave within 24 to 48 hours. But these are staying around for years.
They're forever chemicals.
That's
forever
what they're
chemicals,
known for. Exactly, because they're extremely stable, persistent. They don't break down. Scientists are now trying to figure out how to break them down from the environment, but we still don't know how they break down from the body. And we're continuously exposed. It's in house dust, it's in water, it's in the soil. But again, not to make people feel like, oh, well, what's the point? They're everywhere. There is a point to avoiding further exposure as much as you can. We're not going to avoid it all, but it's the question of, do you want to just lay down, roll over, and just perish, or do you want to give yourself a fighting chance?
There's these hidden toxins that are in our everyday cosmetics that can actually turn cancer genes on inside of the body. My mind was blown when I came across this, and this is related to a study that you broke down on your YouTube channel. Tell us about this study and what some of the findings were.
This study is literally groundbreaking in that there's a long-held belief in common culture as well as through the cosmetic industry itself that beauty and personal care products don't contribute to our toxic load. They don't contribute adversely to our health, and they don't increase rates or risk of disease. This study basically completely shut that down. For the first time, we have been able to see exactly what certain ingredients are doing in the humans, in the human model, because we ethically cannot study chemicals in humans. We can't subject people to toxic chemicals and see what happens. That typically happens in animals. Unfortunately, a lot of these chemicals are being released into our personal care products, into our consumer goods. And it isn't until after decades of use that we start to see correlations and associations with disease. And this study basically asked 41 women to switch out their beauty and personal care products for a very short time, for 28 days, just 28 days. Switch out your beauty and personal care products and stick to a list of approved products that does not contain parabens, phthalates, and other phenols, which are endocrine disruptors. Just to give you a background on endocrine disruptors, these are chemicals that are xenoestrogens that interact with estrogen receptors in the body. They can cause a host of health issues ranging from cancer, infertility, miscarriage, cognitive decline, and so much more. When these women switched out their products, so what they did was they took measurements by injecting the breasts of these really, really brave participants. They took breast cancer cells, measured breast cancer genes before and after the intervention. So the intervention, like I said, was very simple. Only switch out your beauty and personal care products, avoiding certain ingredients: parabens, phthalates, and phenols. After 28 days, they saw a significant reduction in breast cancer gene expression, which is huge. This is in humans. So we're not talking about rats that were subjected to extremely high doses, which is what you normally see. This is doses that you would see in products that are being sold on store shelves that people are using day in and day out as we speak. They have not been banned. They haven't been outlawed. They are still very much prevalent in the marketplace.
I mean, mind-blowing. What are the implications? You know, it's 41 participants, but as you mentioned, it's human beings. And it's also not just like an observational study. They're actually looking at these cancer expression of cancer genes inside of the body. What are the implications for especially all people, but especially women who are listening to the podcast today?
The implications would be that even though there's 41 women, this study showed that the breast cancer genes were activated when they started, meaning that the products that they were using with those ingredients were responsible for activating those genes. Once they took those ingredients away, breast cancer genes turned off. What does this mean? This means that once you stop using products that contain parabens, phthalates, and other xenoestrogens, that breast cancer genes turn off, meaning you reduce the risk of developing breast cancer. One of the risk factors for developing breast cancer is the activation of breast cancer genes. That's the first step in the process of developing cancer, is the genes need to be turned on. Something needs to be turned on because estrogen is actually a carcinogen. It's naturally occurring in the body, but what it does is stimulate growth in estrogen responsive tissues. The breast, the brain, the uterus, the cervix, the gut even has estrogen receptors in it. So these estrogen receptors are all over our bodies. And when we're putting products on our skin that have estrogenic ingredients, they're getting absorbed through the skin into the bloodstream and traveling to areas of the body that are responsive to estrogen, clearly the breast.
Mind blowing. You mentioned a few of these ingredients that they had participants remove. Can you reshare what those ingredients are?
Absolutely. Parabens being one of them. So there are several different types of parabens, and you can find these on your personal care products just by turning the bottle around and looking at the ingredients list. And you can see methyl paraben, butyl paraben, propyl paraben. Those tend to be the most commonly used parabens. There's a long-held belief within the cosmetic industry that these parabens are innocuous, that the amount absorbed is so low that it doesn't matter. But clearly the study shows otherwise.
What are some everyday products that listeners are using literally this morning when they wash their face, when they are putting makeup on? What are some everyday products that you see people using that are sold on the store shelves today, especially here in the United States, that would be an example of being similar to the types of products that women would be using in this study and would contain these ingredients like parabens?
This is an excellent question. And I set out to do research myself. I walked into a store and I picked up several products to see how many out there still have parabens. What are the major products that I see being promoted online that still contain these ingredients? One of them being CeraVe. CeraVe is one of the major brands out there right now. Some of their face washes still have parabens in them. For no good reason. Parabens are completely unnecessary. They're basically used to extend the shelf life. They're preservatives. They don't need to be used. There are plenty of other safer alternative preservatives out there. And it's basically because they're extremely effective and cheap. So they're not being phased out as of yet. Other products that I found were Nivea body lotion, which I personally used for quite a long time. And the issue with body lotion is that you apply it generally over large parts of the body and you don't rinse it off. So the chance for toxic absorption is greater than any other type of product.
If there's these studies that are popping up, like the one that you mentioned, which we've linked to in the show notes, people can take a look at it. We've highlighted on YouTube for those that are watching there. Title being The Reduction of Daily Use of Parabens and Phthalates Reverses Accumulation of Cancer-Associated Phenotypes Within Disease-Free Breast Tissue of Study Subjects. So we have the link to that. So if there's more of this type of research that's popping up, why are companies that are out there, multinational, large conglomerates, why are they still using these ingredients in the products?
There could be several reasons for this. One of them is definitely profit driven, simply because of the effectiveness and the low cost, but also the higher cost of having to substitute their ingredients. But it isn't until consumers become aware of these problematic ingredients and demand safer ingredients that some of these companies will actually start taking action. So that's really the purpose of why I felt it to be so important to share this information, because most people who are using cosmetics these days are young women. There was a study showing that up to 70% of young girls below the age of 12 are actually using cosmetics, being lotions, fragrances, makeup, any of those type of products that are to enhance physical appearance. Those are considered cosmetics. And kids are starting to use them at younger ages these days. And this is something that we really need to pay attention to, since disease rates are skyrocketing among younger populations. So they're not disconnected, I think.
And not only do we need to pay attention to it, there are actually lifestyle aspects that we can all take on. Sure, choosing better products is an easier one, and you've built out a whole entire platform on Instagram. Please, everybody, follow Dr. Burkhart on Instagram. But there are also lifestyle tips that we're going to get to, and one supplement in particular that is incredible at supporting our body's natural ability to detoxify. We're going to get to all that in a minute. So some of this might feel like doom and gloom, but it's for everybody's awareness, including my own awareness as well, that we don't have to live in this toxic soup, which is an experiment. We all don't know. In fact, one of the main messages that you share on social media is that nobody knows for certain what is happening to the human body when you combine all of these different ingredients together and you course them over a lifetime of exposure. Can you chat a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. When it comes to understanding the safety or the toxicity of a chemical, let's say, most studies are done in animal models, so rats and mice, and they're given extremely high doses for short periods of time, maybe longer periods. But when it comes to doing these studies, they could be $1 million. It could take 2 or 3 years to study. Most companies are not going to do this because it's not mandated anywhere for them to do this, except in Europe. Europe has much stricter regulations when it comes to cosmetic ingredients in particular, and just ingredients in general, simply because of how their healthcare system is set up. So they're more of a socialistic setting. So it does not benefit the government for people to get sick, right? Whereas in our country, we live in a more capitalistic society. Things are different here. So it's more focused on profits as opposed to people's health, unfortunately. And so when it comes to understanding the complexity of chemicals that we're exposed to, there is no way to apply that into a laboratory setting. There's just no way. Everybody's using different types of products. People eat different types of food. We have different genetic backgrounds. It's really difficult to make any meaningful conclusions with the complexity. There's hundreds of thousands of chemicals that are being registered and released into the commercial space every single year. There's no way to keep up with that. There's no way to study all of that. Nobody knows. So the framework is innocent until proven guilty, which is exactly what we see with this study on parabens and phthalates.
Fascinating. Yeah, Europe, I believe, has the precautionary principle. And, not to say out there that, European governments have their own challenges in their healthcare system. And obviously there's a lot of beautiful things about capitalism, and I say that as an entrepreneur, that are great. But you're just highlighting the contrast that when one of those, especially in the United States, can get so out of whack, people are left to fend for themselves. And luckily, as we have in America, most people are waking up today from podcast and social media, which is where you've really made your voice known on social media, is that people are hungry for getting to the root of this. They're not believing the common PR statements that are out there, which is, hey, these products have been tested and they are safe. Talk to us about that, because people are like, well, these companies are telling us that this product is labeled as non-toxic, or this company is telling us that these have been tested and that they're safe. Or even I would see PhDs on the other side of things say, all of these are looked at and tested by the FDA, and the ones that are not, these are all generally regarded as safe, and we have no scientific evidence that any of this stuff amounts to anything. What's wrong with those blanket statements?
I'll start with the last one that you just said, which is we don't have any evidence that any of this is toxic. That's the problem. There's no evidence. There's no data. There's no studies. When things are considered generally recognized as safe, they are grandfathered in. They're ushered in. Well, these were added to commercial products within the last 100 years. Sure, just let them slide in. Because
whole categories and classifications.
Exactly. So my personal experience is with flavor and fragrance chemicals. A huge number of those chemicals were just grandfathered in, generally recognized as safe because they were already being used. But nobody tested them to begin with. So it isn't until later that we're like, maybe these chemicals aren't so innocuous after all. Maybe all of a sudden there are concerns with some really popular fragrance chemicals that are now endocrine disruptors and being pulled from shelves. They're now becoming restricted and banned. But the places that are enacting these restrictions are not the US, unfortunately.
Let's talk about fragrance. That is part of your background. People think, wow, I love fragrance. I personally don't. It gives me a headache. I don't feel great about it. As you can see in our studio, I have a high quality air filter. I have all these components that I had to share with my wife, who was obsessed with candles, who's now on the train with me. And we use beeswax candles, which is one of the things you recommend. But what is it about fragrance? Why is it that fragrance would be included in this list of hidden toxic things that are not just found in perfumes, but you see that fragrance is added to everything, dish soap, and then going back to what we previously talked about, even many of the cosmetics, lip balms, lotions that people put on their face. So how are fragrances made, and what are some of the hidden toxic ingredients inside of them that could be and are most likely incredibly problematic to our body?
Fragrances are generally not coming from the source that you think. So a lot of people think they see the word natural fragrance on their label. Oh, it's natural. It must be fine. Well, that just means that it wasn't synthesized from an unnatural source, but it doesn't come necessarily from a rose. If you have a rose scent, it doesn't have to come from rose. So it can come from any other quote unquote natural source. A certain percentage has to be natural, and a certain percentage can still be unnatural. It's very ambiguous. There's a lot of gray area, and there aren't strict regulations on it because the industry regulates itself. That's a whole other issue. But some of the hidden toxins and the issues that we have with fragrance are, number one, you mentioned how pervasive they are. They are literally in everything. Lip products don't need fragrance, in my opinion. A face lotion doesn't need fragrance, but people like them, people enjoy them because of the sensory stimulation that we receive. And we are, in my opinion, becoming overloaded with these fragrance chemicals. The amount of fragrances that are being churned out year by year, they're being pumped into public spaces. There are people that constantly send me messages asking what they can do. How can they get, for example, their apartment building to stop pumping fragrances into their gym? They're trying to exercise and get away from this and be healthier, only to be exposed to something that they're trying to get away from. Some of the hidden toxins are endocrine disrupting phthalates. So the International Fragrance Association, or IFRA, is the industry self-governing body for the fragrance industry. They have a list of what they call the transparency list. If you go on their website, you can actually search and see all the different types of chemicals that could be in the umbrella term fragrance. There are nearly 4,000 at this point. So it can be, the word fragrance can be any combination of nearly 4,000 chemicals, any combination. They include phthalates, those are endocrine disruptors. There are carcinogens in there. Styrene, for example, that's a known human carcinogen. Nothing is being done to regulate these because the industry regulates itself.
When those fragrances come into your body, again, you talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but just to connect it back to fragrances. So those phthalates are coming into your body. What is the potential consequence, right? We don't fully know, but at least we do know that phthalates have an impact on the body, that are exposure. So again, remind everybody, what's actually going on physically in the body that these ingredients would be doing, especially if we're regularly exposed to them?
Well, phthalates have estrogenic activity. So xenoestrogens, meaning foreign estrogens that are coming into the body, they are not naturally occurring, and they activate the estrogen receptor. And what that does is endless. You know, the human, let's say, science has not yet fully studied exactly what's happening when the estrogen receptor gets activated.
But for example, one of those components that we know is that when young girls are exposed to higher levels of estrogen, they can get puberty, they can get their period and hit puberty much earlier. Like you're talking about in some communities, often it's the most disenfranchised communities. You have doctors that have been on this podcast that are saying that we're seeing girls at 8 years old, right, getting their period, developing breast, these other things, which is not what the body would normally be doing. So early puberty, there could be all sorts of disruptions for infertility that could be there. Are there any other examples?
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually studies on young boys that are being exposed that develop breast tissue gynecomastia in young boys. There's actually a shortening of the anogenital distance, which is a measurement of the distance between the anus and the penis. And the shortening is an indication of feminization.
Wow.
And that has been shown with phthalate exposure. Also linked with phthalate exposure is actually early death. So the higher the amount of phthalates that you are being exposed to over your lifetime can correlate with when you die. If that's not shocking enough, I don't know what is. These chemicals are not to be overlooked or to be ignored simply for the fact that it affects your lifespan.
We are going through a time in humanity where, again, we talked a little bit about women, you mentioned about young boys. We're seeing amongst adult males a massive drop in testosterone. Now, we know that one of the major contributors to that is obesity, right? Obesity is one of the things that will drop testosterone. What a lot of people don't talk about is that some of these hidden toxins that you've mentioned also can have an obesogenic effect. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are obesogens that are often in the environment and kind of part of these hidden toxins that people are going through?
They're actually one and the same. So the same chemicals that we've been talking about today, the parabens, phthalates, and even ones that you may have heard of called PFAS chemicals. So anything that's having an effect on the estrogen receptor can also stimulate your fat cells to store fat. And the ironic part is that the more fat you have, these chemicals come in, they get stored in fat. So it's just an endless loop of being exposed, storing more fat, getting exposed, storing more fat. And then these chemicals are being stored in your fat. So you just can't escape them once they're in your body, except for detoxifying, right? So supporting your natural processes of detoxification combined with practicing avoidance as much as you can. So they're in your body. You want to get rid of them. You also want to avoid bringing more in.
Yeah, I heard a doctor on this podcast previously, a physician, a colleague of mine, who said that if you have a bathtub and you're filling it with water, and that water, let's say it's pristine water, is supposed to be clean, right? Outside of naturally occurring minerals and things that are inside of it, it's supposed to be clean. Now, all of a sudden, there's another faucet on the other side that's putting in polluted water inside of it. No matter how much you try to clean your bathtub, no matter how much you try to shovel that polluted water out, if that polluted water is still coming in, you're never going to get that bath water clean because you constantly have exposure coming in. And this goes back to your main point, which is avoidance. If you had to say, based on all of the research that you've done, your background in this space as a toxicologist, what would be a few, let's say 3 to 5, biggest bang for the buck things that we should be avoiding, like categories, right? Like, are fragrances and candles the most important? Is it cosmetics? Is it, this thing? How do you put together a sort of coherent order of operations that most people, everybody's circumstances are going to be a little bit different. Men may not be wearing, in general, makeup, so that might not be the top of their list. But what is the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to avoidance of toxic exposure?
I'll start with what is necessary for survival. So number 1, we need air. Without air, we'll die in a few minutes. So the quality of our air is massively important for our health. And you've mentioned the candles, the fragrances, the scented products, things of that nature. So being aware that we can easily avoid a lot of these negative exposures in the air, that's huge. So simple things like opening your windows and reducing your exposure to these fragrance chemicals, those are going to go a long way. Second, we all need water to survive. Clean water. Filtered water. Unfortunately, our water supply around the world is polluted. Just plain and simple, it's polluted with all different types of consumer products, pharmaceuticals, toxic chemicals, pesticides, heavy metals, whatnot. We need to filter it. So the better water filter you can get, the better your health will be, because we're mostly made of water, right? Third is we need food to survive. Food, when we eat unprocessed, ideally organic, it doesn't have to be all organic. I know some people may have differences in what they can access, but just eating whole unprocessed foods is already going to be a huge reduction in toxic chemicals through your food. Especially
ultra-processed foods.
Exactly.
I believe there are some studies to back this up. We'll have to look it up afterwards. I didn't prepare it for today's podcast. There tends to be a higher concentration of phthalates, chemicals, carcinogens in ultra-processed food, which includes a lot of the fast food that people are eating that's out there.
Exactly.
Processed meats that come from that sort of category. There's just going to be more exposure, more processing done at scale. Sure, it's super cheap, but it's in chemical plants and it's preservatives and it's this and it's that. So just even stepping away from ultra processed foods as the foundation of your diet, I'm hearing you say that's a major step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Food processing. So anytime you process, every step that you add to this process of making ultra processed foods, you're adding some other unknown, undesirable chemical in there. For example, solvents, food packaging, plastic, chemicals that are leaching into the food, so on and so forth. So if you can cook your own meals at home, whole unprocessed foods, that's going to be huge. Next, in order of what we actually need, some people need things like oral care products, right? A lot of people use oral care, personal care products. So the very basic necessities, things like toothpaste, body lotion, things of that nature, deodorant, if you choose, try to make those as low tox as you can. Low tox meaning not trying to be non-toxic, zero tox, because that doesn't exist. Low toxic just means choosing the better option as best as you can, as frequently as you can. And I hope that gives hope to the listeners that we don't have to dump everything and run and hide. It's not about living in fear. It's really about making conscious and intentional, informed decisions about what we're buying and applying to our skin. So that would be number 4. And number 5, if someone chooses to have makeup in their lives or cosmetics or some kind of product to that effect, then again, trying to choose the least toxic option as much as you can, especially for products that go on your lips, since there is some ingestion involved.
I'm going to go through each one of those categories and ask a few more questions about them on behalf of the audience. Before we do that, I want to talk about your background in a particular molecule, compound inside of the body that also could be a supplement that actually could play a crucial role in helping us reduce our internal burden, hence supporting our body's natural ability to detoxify. And that is one of your number 1 most recommended things. Can you talk about what that is?
Yes, it's glutathione. It's the master antioxidant, which I think doesn't do it justice to what this molecule can do. It's very simple. It's 3 amino acids. We all have it in our bodies. The highest levels are found in the liver and kidney, which are the detoxification organs that we have. And the third would be our reproductive organs, interestingly enough. That's how important this molecule is in protecting us. It protects not only just life, but also being able to reproduce.
Yeah, when I heard you break that down initially, I was mind blown. Essentially, if I understood, and I might have this incorrect, but you're saying that there's literally, glutathione is so important for our protection that obviously if the human race cannot reproduce, that is a major problem. We're all gone, right? Both for men and for women. So is it that you were saying that glutathione is literally found in the testes and the ovaries, or that it's synthesized there? Can you break that down?
It is synthesized there. It's found there. It's synthesized there. And once it's depleted, once it's gone, it doesn't come back.
That's nuts. I mean, literally nuts, like testicles. It's nuts. And ovaries as well, too. That's crazy. So essentially, you're inferring that the body finds glutathione and the unburdening of any toxic exposure prior to even the modern industrial world that we lived in. Obviously, human beings would have exposure to naturally occurring toxins in the environment. It could be forest fires. It could be carcinogens through eating and cooking, food that's overcharred. It could be whatever, stuff inside the water. So you're inferring that it's so important that it's a protective layer to protect our reproductive organs?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it's doing. We actually did studies on animals that were born with a genetic mutation to have decreased glutathione. What we saw in those animals when they were exposed in utero to carcinogens that we would find, like you said, in cooked meats, charred meats, things of that nature, just naturally occurring in the environment, we found that the offspring actually had infertility, had fertility issues, and also developed cancer at some point. Multi-generational effects, transgenerational, meaning they were exposed in utero, their kids and their grandkids had problems.
So if you don't have enough glutathione on your body, your whole family tree is up.
Pretty much. To put it directly, that's pretty much.
Yeah,
if you don't have enough glutathione, you're done.
You're done. So I just want to add one thing, just because I've shared it inside of your bio that we've shared in the beginning, but like this is what your PhD was on, right?
Yes.
Can you share a little bit more about that work? How did you decide to make that a part of what you would get your doctorate in?
I actually discovered toxicology almost by accident. I was looking for a summer job when I was in college. And so I found this lab. A woman professor was doing research on glutathione. And I said, what is glutathione? What is this toxicology research? I had no idea what it was. I was washing dishes for her and just observing from the background. And I just became so fascinated with what she was working on. And I just thought, my gosh, this has such far-reaching implications that if people only knew how important this molecule is in our health, our longevity, pretty much the foundation, the pillar of health, what we could do to live longer and live healthier. Because it isn't just about living longer, because we don't want to just live longer and be sick, right? We want to live longer and be healthier at the same time. And glutathione, in my opinion, is really at the foundation of it all.
And just to go a little bit further, is that obviously, we'll get to this in a second, your body, you can get glutathione from a supplement. We'll get into that. That's a whole kind of thing. And that could be useful in certain sections. Your body naturally produces glutathione and it recycles glutathione. Another thing that I learned from you. And there are things and lifestyle behaviors that we can all be doing, and maybe some of us are, and there's some that we can turn up the knob on a little bit to increase our own natural production of glutathione. So let's talk about that. What are some of those things that are the foundational lifestyle pieces that we could all be doing today to make sure that our body is naturally recycling and producing enough glutathione?
So the first thing is toxic avoidance. Glutathione is not just an antioxidant. So when I say not just an antioxidant, it sounds so simple. It's just helping us to prevent oxidation, right? That's not the only thing. It actually will bind to toxic chemicals and help them to leave the body. So it's an active participant, critical player in the process of detoxifying chemicals, environmental chemicals. So the first thing that we can do is practice toxic avoidance, because we don't want to be depleting glutathione. By the way, glutathione is required just simply for the fact that we breathe oxygen. The process of cellular respiration generates free radicals that require glutathione to neutralize them. So if we're already using a certain amount, right, just base level, and then you're adding in all these other chemicals, well, then there's these other fires that glutathione needs to put out. But it's like, oh, well, I got to prioritize just living. So let me just live, survive. But then it means that a bunch of the other stuff is still burning in the background, if that makes sense.
It's like the entire city's on fire. So the fire station has to decide what to prioritize. And they're like, okay, we can't let the mayor's house burn, or we can't let this school burn, which is the right thing. But then everything else around it, because they don't have the resources, because the entire city's on fire, ends up burning.
Right. And that's typically what is likely causing so much disease to pop up because number one, we're already being born with a higher toxic load than our ancestors were, simply because of the environment, because of, how we're living these days, unfortunately. But then factor in the fact that we're adding to it every single day is not helping. And so the glutathione that we have is under tremendous pressure now. We only have a certain amount. Our bodies make glutathione, like you said, and it recycles it, but it recycles it only if the body isn't in a state of inflammation, isn't in a state of oxidative stress. So things that are increasing inflammation and oxidation are things that we need to avoid.
And toxins is going to be one of the first one in that category.
Absolutely.
It's something that we can all do. We can avoid, to the best extent, we can avoid adding new toxins that we expose ourselves to directly. We can at least pump the brakes on that and say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to use an air freshener in my car. I'm not going to use an air freshener at home. I'm not going to use these fragrances all over the house, including candles, which are pretty toxic. We're going to get to that in a minute. I'm going to minimize and I'm going to choose healthier options for cosmetics. In fact, you have a whole partnership with, I think, a company where you sort of have ranked different products that are better for you. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm actually the head toxicologist at the Swell Score, and it's my job to actually vet and handpick these products that go onto this wellness platform, meaning that they have to undergo rigorous screening from myself. We need to look at the contaminant reports. We need to look at the certificate of analysis. Of course, the ingredients are extremely important, even down to the packaging and how sustainable the company is. Because a lot of our products out there, 99.9% are in plastic, right? That's just the norm. But this is something that I'm urging all of us to move away from buying products that are packaged in plastic as much as you can. It's impossible to avoid it all, but as much as you can, right? If there's something that you absolutely love and you don't want to give it up and it's in plastic, just try to make a better choice maybe in another area if you can.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Right.
So I want to give a little plug to the Swell Score. Tessa, could we bring that up? theswellscore.com. I actually wasn't familiar with it before I started following your work. And we can share our screen for those that are watching on YouTube. So this is a website, and you guys have different categories: sauna and infrared, supplement and food, beauty and bath, household, sale. And then people can, they can sign up for like an email list, and you'll keep them posted about things. And then within each of these categories, you break down what are the better products for people.
Exactly. So all the products that we have on the Swell Score have been vetted by doctors and scientists. So myself being the toxicologist on board, we've got naturopathic doctors, medical doctors that are all on board with vetting these products. So it's basically your best bet at finding the safest, healthiest products under one roof so that you don't have to do it all piecemeal. We're holding companies accountable. We're scrutinizing them and putting them through a rigorous vetting process, and only the ones that pass can actually make it onto the Swell Score.
Beautiful. So if you click on the category up top, Tessa, beauty and bath, for example, you can scroll through and you have subcategories on the left-hand side. It's manufacturer, but you could put in candle. We were talking about candles. So if you could tap candle, then great. There's another candle kit that's there. Or you could hit body wash, right? If you go back, that's an area where people are trying to find, better, alternatives, and you can see a few categories. And my guess is, again, because you guys are very meticulous, every month you're adding more products in different categories.
Right.
Because it takes time to be able to do that. Amazing.
Yeah, it's a continuous process, continuous endeavor. I'm extremely passionate about this because I wish I had something like this when I started my low-tox journey.
Something that you talk about in response to a very viral news story about a particular chemical that was found by the Environmental Working Group that is quite dangerous to the body. And in particular, this chemical, which I'm going to have you talk about in a second, was found in high concentrations in a few products that people especially eat for breakfast. Can you talk about this chemical and what products it's been found in and how people can protect themselves from it?
A lot of people like to eat oatmeal for breakfast, oat products. And over the years, like you said, EWG has done a lot of work to uncover what's actually happening in the food supply. So years ago, the issue was glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. It is now being recognized as a human carcinogen. That actually, fortunately, the issue has almost gone away, especially if you eat organic oats. You can avoid the glyphosate because glyphosate is not allowed in organic agricultural products. Now they found chlormequat, which is a new, unfortunately, chemical that's being added to food. The EPA recently approved it. It was not approved for use in food before. It is not allowed in Europe. It was used traditionally to a growth regulator in plants. So it keeps them from getting too tall. The issue with oats is that if the oat plant gets too tall, harvesting becomes more challenging and more difficult. So they've sprayed it with chlormequat to keep the plants from getting too tall and snapping off and whatever, causing issues with the processing. But then the chlormequat is now in our food.
Wow. And I think it was even like in a lot of any products that have oats. So like your standard sort of like Quaker oats and that sort of thing. But the thing is, you don't have to stay away from this food completely. Just by switching it up a little bit, you can maybe reduce your exposure. So what should you be switching it up to?
Just get organic oats.
That's it.
Yeah, organic oats. Because chlormequat is synthetic. It's not allowed to be used in organic products. So if you want to avoid chlormequat and glyphosate, then USDA certified organic oats specifically.
Fantastic. We'll link to that video as well. You know, you and I were chit-chatting a little bit earlier. In addition to your own story of how your health suffered, you had mentioned that you've even had some family members that have gone through their own health challenges. And at the beginning of the podcast, I was mentioning that indoor air pollution and outdoor air pollution is something that we all want to be paying attention to, because I learned from one of the top researchers in this space who's been on this podcast before, Dr. Ray Dorsey, that it was one of three things that was highly linked to from the research group that they've put together at University of Rochester that has investigated the origins and the sort of accelerants in the environment that are causing this major spike in Parkinson's disease. They found out that one of them was air pollution, indoor and externally, could be from factories, could be from the second item, which was pesticide exposure, individuals who live nearby farms. We've had one of the top researchers in the world on MS, multiple sclerosis, who's been on this podcast. Her name is Dr. Terry Walls. She's actually gotten a grant from the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. This is actually a crazy story. When she first started talking about the literature of things that have been linked to things that might be creating neurological issues and therefore be potentially linked with correlatively with multiple sclerosis, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation got wind of her giving these talks. And she's a professor at like a university, and she's a veteran administration. She's a doctor at the VA. They actually banned any group from having her talk at their multiple sclerosis meetups. They said, you're banned. So she went from being banned to like 10 years later, when she had published all these incredible studies and done this incredible work, and she developed this protocol called the Walls Protocol. She was awarded a $1 million grant from the same organization that banned her to continue to study the link between environmental toxins, diets, and other things, and its relationship to multiple sclerosis. But anyways, the reason that I brought her up is very similar to the work of Ray Dorsey. She feels that a big contributor of her ultimately having multiple exposures that gave her multiple sclerosis, and she had a very bad version of it. She feels it was growing up on a farm. She literally used to go and mix a big 5-gallon drum of water and hand mix it with her hand and mix the pesticides in there. She would use her hand to mix the pesticides. And she thinks that that's a big part of why she ultimately ended up getting multiple sclerosis. She has no way to prove that, but she thinks that's one contributor. In addition to those things, indoor air pollution, outdoor air pollution, bad air quality in general, pesticides. Another thing that this Dr. Ray Dorsey and his team have identified is, in particular, these extremely toxic chemicals that are used in the dry cleaning process. And one of them was all over the news recently because the FDA finally listened to some of the researchers who have been making noise about this. And Dr. Ray Dorsey, I've actually brought you a copy of his book here, and I want to connect you to him. It's called Ending Parkinson's Disease, A Prescription for Action. They have been raising the alarm and him and a lot of his colleagues. EPA finally listened, and I believe last year, they banned one of these ingredients that's used in dry cleaning. It's called tetrachlorohydrin, something like that. But still, the problem is that there's a sister chemical, which I'm going to butcher if I try to pronounce, but it's chlora something tetrahydrine, whatever. And even though one of them is banned, the industry is still using this other ingredient. And it's one of the main reasons that he tells people that try to minimize your use of dry cleaning as much as you can, or it's worthwhile to pay a little bit of extra money and use green or eco-friendly dry cleaning solutions that are out there. Is any of that on your radar at all? Or do you recommend to people as well too, to minimize dry cleaning exposure?
Yeah, dry cleaning is something I actually stopped doing. So whenever I buy clothes, which is pretty rare nowadays anyway, I don't buy anything that's dry cleaning because I've actually had family members who owned dry cleaning shops and suffered from chronic diseases. This was long before I even studied toxicology. I was a middle school student, and I already saw these health effects, and I could smell the chemicals. It was just not pleasant. So I already knew intuitively early on that dry cleaning is not a good practice. And so once I started learning about the chemicals that are being used, anything that has a chlorine in it, just chloro, all of the chemicals that you've mentioned, chlorine is, if you look on the periodic table, is one of the most electrophilic elements. The more electrophilic, the more reactive. The more reactive, the more toxic. So this is a connection. If you see something, for example, fluoro is also highly electrophilic. That's PFAS, right? The F in PFAS is fluoro. So anything that's highly electrophilic is something just kind of keep on your radar. Chlorine, fluorine, those types of chemicals, bromides. So just kind of to jog people's memories a little bit, if you hear these terms, chlormequat, right? We can start to draw these connections and you'll start to notice, oh, there's a lot of these types of chemicals out there.
Wow, super important. A lot of people are aware, and there's, especially with COVID happening and other stuff and a lot more work from home in general, maybe people are not going into the office as much, so they don't have to wear sort of things that you would traditionally have to get dry cleaned all the time, like suit and ties. The office space has gotten a little bit more casual, but people are still washing their clothes at home. And a lot of the solutions that are out there, even brands that we see at Whole Foods, they may actually not be that much better for you than some of these, more popular brands that you get at Costco and Walmart. Talk to us a little bit about greenwashing when it comes to these eco, quote unquote, products that a lot of people are using to clean their clothes at home.
So greenwashing is the practice of using deceptive marketing to make consumers believe through the brand, the colors, the names, the pictures that you put on a product, the types of words that you use, like natural, plant-based, is to lead consumers to believe that a product is healthier, safer, or more eco-friendly than it actually is. So it's deceptive, it's misleading. And the problem is that most consumers, myself included, don't necessarily understand that this is happening all the time. And you see, oh, look at this free and clear product come out. It doesn't have the colors, it doesn't have the fragrances, but what's in this product exactly? Is it safe for me or not? It's hard to tell without actually reading the ingredients list. And that's really the missing link that nobody learns in school. It's not taught in school, but it's something that now we know the issues with so many consumer products out there is really boiling down to what's in it. It's the ingredients.
Are there favorite types of more better for you, better for the environment solutions when it comes to, let's say, the detergent that you'd be using to wash your clothes?
Yeah. So one thing to avoid are fragrance detergents and fabric softeners. These, again, with the scented and fragrance products. Earlier in this episode, we talked about what are the sources in our homes of air pollutants. Again, is also the laundry detergent that we're using, the fabric softener, the dryer sheets. These scents and fragrances, they're against the skin. We're breathing them in. They get released into the environment. So if you walk around your neighborhood and you smell the scent of laundry detergent coming from your neighbor's house, at least I have experienced this. It's pretty crazy. Almost every house I walk past, I can smell it.
Yeah.
I'm probably the only home in the area that isn't using it, I would guess. But some of the better options would be something that doesn't contain the fragrance, that doesn't contain the optical brightener. So if you get the bright white, whatever they market, it's a blue detergent. That's actually, it's a trick. It's an optical illusion. It's a brightener. It just makes it look brighter, but it's not actually brightening.
And it's not actually brightening, and it's also bad for your body.
Right. And the environment, because a lot of these don't biodegrade. So you wash them away and then they just stay in the water that goes into the environment. But not only that, there was a series of studies that showed that even when you do like extra rinsing with your laundry, the residues of the laundry detergent aren't completely removed from your clothes. So if you think, oh, it's been rinsed away, it's washed away, it's actually not. It's still on the clothing.
Are there any brands that you would recommend that are out there, or people can go to the website?
Yeah, it's on my website. One of my favorite ones is Meliora. It's non-toxic. It's made with very minimally processed scent. I don't use any scent or fragrance laundry products. And it's actually also plastic free. So you can get it without a plastic container. It comes in powder form.
It's great. And your website's a great resource and your content's a great resource. I even learned things about products that I regularly use. When I travel, we would often pick up these, Dr. Bronner's little soaps that you would use, and they're kind of like an all-purpose soap. You can wash your face with it. You can use it as a body wash. Some people use it as a shampoo. Probably more guys than, girls. Women have more like specialized products for everything. Guys just use like one thing. But something interesting that I learned about Dr. Bronner's that I thought actually was a very, healthy for you, better for you brand, clean brand, is that in general, they do have a version that you recommend, but because of the lack of transparency, the version of their product that you recommend the most is the unscented version, because the rest of their products all have scented. So it's the unscented baby version. I think it's like it's used for like babies, like the baby wash. That was surprising for me to learn that this brand that I always thought that was super clean, and I'm sure it is a lot cleaner than a lot of the brands that are there, still the fragrances inside of it could be a problem.
Right. They make excellent products. They make great soaps, very, like you said, all-purpose Castile soaps, bar soaps. The baby unscented one is the one that I would use if I needed some soap like that. And I was surprised that when I read the ingredients on some of the other varieties, for example, the almond scented, it didn't actually contain almond. It contained fragrance, almond fragrance. So when I asked the manufacturer about this, they said that they cannot use almond oil because almond oil contains cyanide, which is true. But instead of labeling it as what it was, which was a different type of oil, not necessarily synthetic fragrance, but a different type of oil, that I found that to be misleading, because when you label it as fragrance, then the brain automatically says this is undisclosed synthetic fragrance. This is a red flag, instead of saying what the oil actually was, because they used a different type of oil that smells like almonds, but isn't almonds. So they didn't want to label it. It was a little bit of a gray area, kind of confusing situation. But what I'm hoping to see is more transparency, just labeling what the actual ingredient was, because a lot of consumers are confused by this, myself included.
Yeah, we're all confused about it. And also, we're not trying to throw Dr. Bronner's under the bus. This is an industry-wide issue that's going on, even for a lot of people who genuinely think that they're doing the best job that they can, and they are making better for you products that are out there in the world. And Dr. Bronner's, which has been around forever, has been a big leader in that. I have no affiliation with them, but I've used their products for a long time. I know that their heart is in the right direction and they're trying to make the right decisions. But this just goes back to the idea that a lot of people are just undereducated, even the companies themselves that are making these products. And this is a big part of like, hey, let's all get educated together, not so that we freak out, not so that we live in fear, but that we can actually protect families, protect individuals, and get out of this trend where chronic disease is rising every single year and things are getting worse and worse. Younger and younger individuals are getting diagnosed with cancer, type 2 diabetes, these endocrine disruptors. Young women are getting their periods at younger and younger ages. I've heard from clinicians that are friends of mine of seeing, young women in their 6, 7 years old getting their period in some instances because they're being exposed to so many endocrine disruptors in the environment. And of course, in many of these instances, their diets are really bad. So this is kind of like my friend Casey Means said it best. He said, we don't want to freak out, but at the same time, we want to freak out because Rome is on fire. And when something is on fire, you raise the alarm, you pull the alarm and say, guys, listen, we don't want to panic, but we need to understand that our house is on fire and actually take measured steps to do something about it.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more because it's at a tipping point where it could go either way. It can go really, really bad, or you can do your best and try to head in the positive direction. Because we're seeing now just population wide disease rates, like you said, are going up. Sperm counts are dropping. Kids are getting period earlier. Not only that, but women are going into menopause earlier. So premature menopause is also an issue. And also with men. So it's across the board for men, women, and children. We do need to raise the alarm bells. We do need to spread awareness, education, but it's really important to spread the solution as well. And that's really my goal in everything that I do, is educate on the problem, why it's important, and what we can do going forward so that we don't have to stay in a fear-based panic mode, because that is not conducive to health at all. Stress is so toxic.
Yeah, stress is so toxic. We don't want fear. We don't want panic to set in for sure. Dr. Burkhart, as we wind down here, I thought it would just be nice to remind our audience, for those that heard the interview, but I know a lot of new people are listening to this interview, just remind them a little bit about your own personal health journey, some of the challenges you went through, and how are you feeling today?
Well, thankfully, I'm feeling amazing today. So I think that's what I want to address first is I feel younger, more vibrant, more energetic, more level-headed, more clear-headed than I ever have in my life. And it's all thanks to a low-tox lifestyle. But I wasn't always this way. I grew up with a very conventional American lifestyle. In fact, we were low income in our household, so we couldn't afford a lot of things. We tried to cook food at home as much as we could, but there were processed foods, there were contamination incidents where I grew up, and it just was part of the hand that I was dealt. And as I got older, I started having more health issues once I reached puberty. And I really suffered for a long time. And doctors couldn't help me, and they just kind of sent me away with, the pill. So I got on that for a long time. And then what that caused was unknown damage to my body until I was in my late 20s and I wanted to have children. And then that's when things started to fall apart. I had health issue after health issue. I tried everything that they told me. I went to 6, 7 different doctors, couldn't find the solutions. And I was really at just a breaking point, the lowest I had ever felt, the worst I ever felt. So I look younger now than I did 10 years ago. Then I absolutely, if there's a side-by-side picture, and some people can't believe that was me, how bad I looked. But I just want to give people hope. I'm a living, walking, breathing testimonial that a low-tox lifestyle actually works, because I was able to recover my fertility. I have 2 healthy children. We don't have any chronic diseases. We don't have allergies. And we just do the best that we can. I don't try to control the exposures they have at school because I can't. I just do what I can at home. And I educate my children so that they can avoid the pain that I went through because of what we didn't know back then. But now we know.
Yeah, in many ways, you became a whistleblower because you were somebody that worked for a lot of these companies, making a lot of these different products that are out there. And part of your story that we didn't touch on here is that you partially feel that you got sick because you were working in a facility where you were exposed to a lot of these chemicals. Can you just mention that briefly?
Yeah, the work environment where I was working in a flavor company, and just above my office were chemistry labs. And so I don't know the air quality. I wasn't thinking about air quality back then, but my office, I constantly had to wipe the surfaces because of how much dust there was. And dust, of course, we don't want to be breathing in dusty, dirty air. And so I have no idea how much of that contributed to the health issues that I had. In addition to the stress of being in a new job, moving to a new place, we all have life challenges, right? Things that happen when you change to a new career, for example, a new job, move somewhere, that's stressful on the body. But on top of that was the toxic burden I had from my entire life, childhood, everything. Because toxic exposure actually begins before birth. As soon as the sperm meets the egg, toxic exposure begins. That's technically known as like day 0, right? And the toxic load that your parents have, we somewhat inherit that. So what your grandparents were exposed to can affect you, right? And so we what my goal is to really empower people to know that the changes that you make today benefit not only you, but your future generations on so many levels. Because once you start to educate yourselves and your family, then you start to uncover what are some of the issues that we can really just address on a day-to-day basis. But the health issues that I struggled with, I believe, were the result of the environmental exposures I had in that particular office building. There was just a lot of chemicals being used in that building.
That's incredible. Well, I mentioned it before, but I just want to give you so much gratitude for having the courage to question your income. You know, it was how you were making money, was working at these flavoring houses, and you were questioning things. It's very difficult to do. Sometimes when somebody's an expert in something and has a PhD behind their name, they think that they might know everything about it, but you had a little bit of an insider outsider view. And on top of that, your body was struggling and you were dealing with your own health issues, but not everybody is able to make the switch to at least ask the question to say, hey, maybe these things aren't as safe as I thought I was. Let me dig into it a little bit more. So first of all, having the courage to question is huge, because our audience and the hundreds of thousands of people that follow you on Instagram as well as YouTube have benefited incredibly. You know, we talked about this a little bit before we recorded, but our last interview together has over like 1.2 million views. And there are hundreds of comments on there of people feeling like they have finally been red-pilled and woken up to the fact that there are so many different toxins in our environment, and we have to not give up control to these companies. Instead, we have to be the CEO of our own health, not in a way that's fearful, not in a way that we're panicking, but to make conscious decisions and say, you know what, maybe I'm not going to have these products that have more exposure than what I need. Maybe I'm just going to not have candles in my house. Maybe I'm going to filter my water because I can't necessarily trust my local municipality because they're overburdened and they're not even testing for things like PFAS or other, harmful ingredients that are there. So on behalf of my audience and all the people that are watching this interview today and all the people that follow you, I want to acknowledge you for your incredible work and service and commitment to this space.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really meaningful to me, especially because as someone who has training in toxicology, it was, I would say, orders of magnitude more difficult for me to question what was going on, because I was all in. I was all in on the system, on how things were working. There's no way that everything that we've been told is essentially a lie. There's no way that we are human guinea pigs. There's no way that none of this stuff has ever been tested. I just could not believe it. As a toxicologist, I could not believe it. And so it really, I think, extended the period of time before I started to make the change. But then once I started making the changes, then the improvements were rapid, because it was as if my body was just screaming for help, like, please help. And I know a lot of people are out there feeling the same way, that they just need something to hope for. And there's so much hope out there. That's what I want really people to remember, is there's so much hope. Don't give up. One little change a day, 1% better, one foot in front of the other.
Hey, YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.
I want people to have less. I don't want people taking 18 supplements. The biohacking community is cool that it got people interested, but it really became a lot of overkill to me. I just feel like simplicity is so much easier to manage long-term.